Thanks, Malia. Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Utilities for All People's Playbook launch. I'm Selena, and I am the director of the Energy Democracy Project. We're a network of about 40 organizations that are working across the country from Alaska to Puerto Rico for a reimagined energy future, where people across race and class and gender and geography have the access to clean local energy that we need to survive and thrive in an era of climate change. So, today is a very exciting launch of an effort that has taken years to come together and make the Utilities for All playbook. And today we are also joined by some really powerful activists who have played a central role in the fight for debt jubilee. We have Erica Flores moderating the conversation, who also served as the coordinator for the playbook, joined by Katie Southall of Knoxville Water and Energy for All. We have Jessica Tovar of Local Clean Energy Alliance, and we have Monica Lewis-Patrick from We the People of Detroit. And a big thanks to Climate Advocacy Lab for tech support and ongoing support as a partner of the Energy Democracy Project. Before we move on to the panel, let's head over to the next slide. And I'm excited to announce that the playbook is now accessible for you all and for your networks. You can go to the URL that is on this slide, and I'll also type it in the chat to go ahead and download the playbook. We'll ask for your email address, and you can choose if you'd like to give some money for the Energy Democracy Project and our ongoing organizing efforts, and then you can share it out with your community. This is a really powerful piece. I'm very biased because I'm part of the project, but I think you all are going to enjoy it as well. So thanks again for being here. And without further ado, pass the mic over to Erica.
Great. Thank you so much, Selena. And thank you everyone for being here today. I want to start by just taking a moment and asking everyone to just take a deep breath with me. I know that right now in our world, there's a lot that's going on. The last few weeks in particular have been really intense. And I want us to make some space for that. And so I know there's a lot of emotions and things that our bodies are carrying. And so I just ask that everyone breathe in with me for a second and breathe out. And I want to name that we are coming here today to specifically talk about utility debt and utility shutoffs. We are here to talk about how we can create a future where we can all live in our homes and have access to running water, to have access to electricity that can help us to do our homework, to work from home, to complete regular necessities like cooking and cleaning, and to just exist in a way that is comfortable. I want to go ahead and share my screen here and take a moment to really just think about what it looks like for us to have a world where that exists and to think about how different that would look from our current reality. The truth is that in 2020, in the early days of the pandemic, this was actually something that we saw was achievable. While the pandemic was causing a lot of harm in our lives and with the loss of family members and friends, we saw that this need for clean energy, clean water was a lifeline. And it still is a lifeline today. And we know that in these early days of the pandemic, the government was able to act to actually provide electricity and water to folks. We saw that California distributed nearly $1 billion through an arrearage program. And even swing states or states that lean more purple, we saw progress, such as in North Carolina, where the governor actually signed a moratorium on electricity shutoffs. And this only came from the pressure from 30 grassroots organizations coming together and really forcing the governor to do so. And so we know that these types of wins are possible, and we know that it's going to take people power to win them. It was kind of during this time around the pandemic that the Debt Jubilee Subcommittee of the Energy Democracy Project started. And we have worked on a number of things through the years, but the goal of the subcommittee was really to create space for relationship building and shared learning and true collaboration on projects that are around, utility bills and debt and shutoffs. And so in 2021, we released the model rule for debt forgiveness to be used by, commissions and to get introduced in dockets. We also in 2022 created the utility shutoff and debt data transparency model statute that could be used legislatively. And in 2021, we also hosted a virtual National Day of Action calling upon utilities to cancel utility debt that had been, accumulated over the pandemic. And through this work, we know that the unfortunate truth is that in 2022, rollbacks were already happening. So even as early as this, still what I consider to be the early pandemic days, we were no longer having these moratoriums in place. We were no longer having access to water and electricity. And the reason is because of the existing energy model we have, where it is very centralized, where there are a few people who make decisions for the many, who choose to line their pockets instead of giving access to these vital resources. And the only way for us to win is truly to get organized and have a way to fight back collectively. But the issue is that it can be really hard to get. I think I might have gotten muted. But in 2022, we had. Okay, just checking that no one is asking a question. In 2022, we had this idea to create a playbook to essentially help organizers get off the ground, to jumpstart their organizing efforts, to also help existing nonprofits and community groups to sharpen and advance their existing organizing, and to really give a playbook for how folks can organize around these issues. Because we know that utilities have these similar playbooks that they use to make their processes extremely complex, to not allow folks to actually engage in these processes and have no say or no democracy in the decisions that directly affect them. And so the goals really were to be able to provide this resource. And so over time, over, like Selena mentioned, multiple years, we spent time truly thinking about, what questions do we need to answer? What questions do people need to know to begin to organize around these issues? And who has the answers to those questions? Who knows what we need to do? And through that, we interviewed 16 really powerful organizers across the country, some of whom are on this panel who are joining us today. And we synthesized these key themes, these recommendations that they gave, the lessons that they learned from their on the ground work. And we knew that this was such powerful information that we really wanted to bring to life. And so from funding from the Climate Advocacy Lab and the Union of Concerned Scientists, we were able to, craft multiple drafts and go through several collaborative review processes with a number of EDP groups contributing to this process and giving feedback on the resource that we have today. And also getting to work with a graphic designer to truly bring this text, these stories to life. And ultimately, that has led us to today, where we have launched. Today is the big day where we get to celebrate this work. But I also want to help folks to be able to utilize this content. So the playbook is separated into 3 distinct parts. We start with kind of laying out the groundwork for what the problem is, and then moving into what an alternative could look like. From there, the 3rd section is the bulk of all of the advice, all of the lessons learned from these activists throughout the country. And I want to, give some questions as to, what people might be looking for when they're engaged in these sections. So you can totally read the playbook front to back. Would love for you to do that. But I also know time can be a limited resource. And for folks to utilize this resource in the way that best suits them, I wanted to give a little bit of guidance. If you're looking for facts and data and things that can help you to build your own story in your community about how these utilities are taking advantage of, community members and everyday people, you can look towards the first section to find a lot of those data points. You can also learn a little bit more about how we even got to this place that we are in today, and also see, how these different ownership models work. So whether it's an investor-owned utility or a rural electric co-op, This is where you're going to get all of that basic kind of groundwork, foundational knowledge that can be really helpful. The second part of this playbook, if you're wondering, what should I be advocating for instead of the existing model that I currently see in my community? Or, what examples already exist? What have other states done? What have other communities done? And how can we actually logistically end shutoffs or end utility debt? What are the steps that we need to actively push for and go through to actually win those tangible outcomes for everyday people? Section 2 is going to be your friend to answer those types of questions. And the third section is really going to be key if you want to know tips and tricks for how to actually win, what information you need to have, and especially what lessons that you can learn from other organizers. And so I wanted to kind of lay this out so that folks know that this resource is meant to be a resource to, take different parts and utilize them. Don't feel like it has to be a stagnant, text that if you don't read every page, there's, things that you're gonna need to get out of it. Definitely choose your own adventure. Use this the way that's most useful for you. And I would love to hear about how folks do use this and how folks are getting, the material actually utilizing that in their community. So with that, I just wanted to give a really brief overview of this, the process, how we started, and how you can use this resource. But ultimately, I want to hear from our panelists, and I want to hear from you all as well. Once you've read this resource, once you've utilized it, how has this worked for you? So with that, I just want to say thank you to everyone for your energy and investment and commitment in this project and for being here today for the launch. And I am really excited to pass it over to our panelists now to share some of their story as well.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Erica. Really looking forward to hearing feedback from folks who are on the call who are checking out the playbook and seeing what seems exciting for you. I'm going to pass the mic first over to Jessica Tovar of Local Clean Energy Alliance to share a bit about her work and about the engagement that she's doing with local community around canceling debt. Jessica, over to you.
Okay, thank you very much, Selena. I wanted to also share that I do have slides, so if I could get share screen access, that would be great. Um, First and foremost, if you don't know who the Local Clean Energy Alliance is, we are small organization, small but mighty, based in the Bay Area. We have an office in Oakland, and we do some work in the East Bay area as well as also parts of San Joaquin County. And so that's a lot of the hyper local work, but we do also engage a lot on the statewide level in California. And then obviously with the connection, the network that we have with the Energy Democracy Project. Also, I guess we were like co-founders of this network as well. So I wanted to just kind of uplift a little bit. We're not an agency, like an organization that necessarily focuses on like rates and affordability solely independently, but we do kind of really address overall benefits. And obviously, the fact that our communities are living in, heavy burdened communities and overburdened by utility debt, it's a huge issue. So I will share my screen. And pardon the messy, whoa, there we go. Let me grab it back. Kind of lost my, hold on just a second. Oh no, okay, there it is. A little bit messy, messy desktop. Can you see my slides, folks? I want to make sure.
Try resharing, Jessica.
Oh, okay. Yeah, it seemed like it was a little, maybe a Zoom kind of corrupt. Okay, can you see the photo now?
Yes. Yeah, perfect.
Okay, excellent. Thank you. So I wanted to just address that, through the state, we've kind of weighed in a lot at the CPUC, California Public Utilities Commission out of necessity, because these investor-owned corporations are running amok on our communities and at the same time making us pay for all their mess, including wildfires, busted gas pipelines. I mean, anything that's their fault, we are forced to pay for, as well as, the injustice of, operating dirty operations, dirty energy operations in our communities. So it's a huge issue. But during the pandemic, we saw things get worse, right? And so we really were participating in, calling for the cancellation of utility debt at that time, and just really honing in on our utilities are a human right, right? And we could not, kind of shelter in place safely without having access to water, access to electricity. And that is true for the day to day, right? So we did a lot of work with youth, with elders, members, to really do a lot of this advocacy, and even through social media, where at the time we couldn't come together in person, right? So we do a lot of work around a local community choice program that is really servicing Alameda County and some parts of the San Joaquin County. And those counties are very different. Alameda County is like where Oakland, Berkeley is. And then there's some more suburban areas like in Livermore, Dublin, and Pleasanton. And then you have communities in the San Joaquin County, which are part of the breadbasket in California. And so I wanted to just highlight that. And that logo there, the People's Clean Power Alliance, that's our local kind of alliance that really advocates in these communities. We have different activists and organizations that are a part of that. And so this local community choice program essentially replaced PG&E in offering electricity, but you still receive a PG&E bill because you're charged for all that infrastructure charges as well as gas. But that line item towards electricity is now kept local through a local agency. And this agency used to be called East Bay Community Energy, has changed its name to Ava Community Energy as they expanded into other territories beyond the East Bay area. And we advocated for this agency because we want to make sure that the money stays local, but it gets reinvested back into the community in the form of various benefits, including affordability, but also creating local clean energy jobs and the many benefits that we could get from a clean energy infrastructure and transition. So one of the things that we did was we advocate for money to be leveraged for grants for organizations, nonprofits. And in 2022, we made a big stink about, well, folks are really struggling right now with affordability in the middle of the shutdown, folks having lost their job, all the economic downturn at the time, that was really bad. And so we were able to get the agency to offer grants of 30,000 to different nonprofit organizations. And I don't remember exactly how many they were, but it was really to get people enrolled into the existing programs, which are all acronyms that I couldn't break down for you, but they're known as CARE, FARA, there's the LIHEAP program. I mean, there's so many different ones, but we were also able to move money into the local LIHEAP program, which is an important program because if you're behind on your bill and you're about to get cut off, you can apply for these LIHEAP funds. They will pay the 3 months back so to keep your power on. And so this is really important so that poor folks are not left in the dark, right? The downside to that program, though, is we wanted it to be ongoing, and the agency only did it that 1 year. And so there's a constant fight to keep these kind of programs going and ongoing, and making these agencies understand that utility debt is an ongoing problem. And so, I just wanted to highlight that because we're still pushing on this. And then I want to highlight a little bit about the agency. Their operating budget is just under $1 billion. Okay, this is a local agency that serves 2 counties. And their 2024-2025 estimated fiscal year surplus is estimated at $107 million. About 158,000 of their customers are under the CARE FARA, so they're low income. And those are the people that are enrolled, right? Because we recognize there are people that are not enrolled because they don't know about the programs, they don't know how to enroll, or they might be afraid to enroll, right? So we're always addressing that need as well, and kind of to reach that gap. So what this agency is doing is about 10% of the surplus going to be going into bill credits for CARE and FARA low-income customers. I believe last year that meant a $75 bill credit, but that's for the year. And then this year it's to be determined. So we're actually gonna have another fight in terms of making sure that the San Joaquin County communities that are new to this agency still get the full benefit, even though they've only been part of paying into the agency for 3 months in this last fiscal year. So I wanted to name that.
Jessica, I'm gonna
Um,
jump in and ask you to start to wrap up so we can pass the mic over.
Yeah, thank you so much. Yeah, that was it in short. That was my last slide, but I just wanted to address, we're doing everything we can at the at the local level, and then also really trying to move and mobilize folks to speak to the bigger agencies in the state of California, and connect with folks throughout our country. Thank you so much. Clean power to the people.
Thanks, Jessica. Thanks for all your work in California. We're going to move over to Michigan. I'm going to pass the mic to Monica Lewis Patrick of We the People of Detroit. Welcome, Monica. Just sent you an unmute request, Monica, when you're ready.
All right. Peace and blessings, everyone. Can you hear me all right? All
Yes.
right. So thank you so much, Utilities for All. We are extremely blessed to be here with all of you and can't wait to hear all of the additional amazing work that's happening, not only here in the Great Lakes, but across the nation. But I'm Monica Lewis Patrick, and I have the honor and privilege of serving as the president and CEO of We the People of Detroit. Can I share my screen? Okay. Can you see?
Not yet. Can you stop share and try one more time?
Yes, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Share. It should be up.
Yes. Looks like there is
Not
a
coming through.
Zoom screen broadcast notification that you're sharing as opposed to the slide.
Stop sharing. Then try it again. It's still not coming up, Selena.
No, yeah, not seeing it.
It's
Oh,
still the screen
okay.
broadcast.
Okay. Well, we're just going to move into it.
Okay.
But just wanted to talk a little bit, and I can give a link that provides more context. But our work at We the People of Detroit has centered around many democratic processes, one being public education, fighting to maintain the democratic process. During the bankruptcy, we actually had our constitutional protections set aside. Our elected officials were removed and replaced by unelected, unaccountable political persons. And so we have seen the worst of this nation. This is not the austerity that we see playing out nationally. It's not new to us. Actually, Detroit and Flint were the beta test for what people would tolerate in terms of being able to deny just the basic human right to water. And so our organization stands on the shoulders of a legacy of work that has existed in Michigan for over 2 decades now. We were actually mentored by the Honorable Councilwoman Joanne Watson, who, along with Marianne Mahaffey, crafted the first water affordability policy in the nation. The reason that is important is that since the late 1990s, Detroit has seen an erasure of not only home ownership, but the denial of the basic right to water. And the reason this is so egregious is that we actually live in the Great Lakes. We sit on 23% of the world's fresh water. We live in a state that calls itself the Great Lakes State. Detroit actually provides water to 126 municipalities and townships. We provide water to 3.8 million Michiganders. Approximately 40% of the entire population of the state of Michigan gets its water from an infrastructure that was built on the backs of the residents and the taxpayers of Detroit. But what we saw from late 20 to 2012 up until the first 6 months of the pandemic is that we saw the shutting off of 171,000 households. And the reason that's so significant, at one given time within a 12-month period, they were shutting off over 8,000 households per week. And what that looks like in a very dense urban setting is that people can't wash their hands properly, they can't properly deal with their hygiene, they can't properly sanitize their homes. So there was a medical report that came out in 2016 that said that southeastern Michigan sit in the largest hepatitis A outbreak in American history. And what we found that was even more egregious is that many of our institutions and governmental leadership was silent on those issues. Few people would even speak about what was happening in Michigan in terms of water disparity and water injustices. So it left us as the people and the community to be able to use citizen science to evidence the public harms that were happening, not only in our community, but then helping other communities replicate the science and data collection we were doing. So we did some mapping, and what we were able to show, we were able to debunk many of the myths and the lies that were being perpetuated, that the reason that people were not paying their water bills is that poor people just get up every day and decide they're not going to pay their bills. Not that the water bill is not affordable, that water rates have gone up in Detroit over the last 40 years, over 400%. That water rates in Flint have gone up over the last decade, 320%. In places like Toledo, in the last couple of years, water rates have gone up 120%. And then, of course, before Chicago enacted at least some level of not shutting off water, they had seen their water rates triple in 9 years. So we know that the issue was not just one of the urban core, but it actually was a national issue. So it's very difficult to be able to fight an issue when people believe that you're the cornerstone of the problem. But if you can use science and data to evidence those harms, then it shifts those dialogues. And so we use science and data, but we also use the fact that as we went door to door, we found out that it's very hard to ask a person to fill out a survey when the person doesn't have their basic needs met. And so we stopped the survey process that now has been historically noted by Oxford University, and you have over 55 universities across this country that are using our science and research and data this very day. But what we found is that as we were researching and knocking on doors, people didn't have water to make a baby bottle. They didn't have the necessary water they needed to clean up an elderly person that may be living in their home that they're caring for. That they were afraid sometimes to stay in a home because in the state of Michigan, if you don't have running water for 72 hours, your children can be taken. Well, the only place that we saw these egregious laws enacted were places like Detroit and Flint. We also were able to unearth the fact that much of the austerity we saw playing out in Michigan was about stealing this major part of the infrastructure that was owned in Detroit, but that was servicing many communities, several of them communities of color. And so we organized around being able to defeat this very egregious law called emergency management, which allowed them to take and spin off and sell off aspects of the Detroit Water and Sewage Department. So it's an asset to this very day that we own, but the only reason they left us in ownership is so they could leave the legacy debt on the backs of the residents. And then at the same time, they have a third-party utility management entity that is managing our infrastructure to the degree that they are shifting our assets under their control, and now they will be assets that they have owned, but they haven't paid for. And then what we know is that across the region, those 126 municipalities, they pay wholesale for their water because we're forced by the state to only sell it based on what it costs to purify, clarify, and distribute. But Detroiters have to pay retail for that same water source. So the very people that built the system are burdened with the cost of the system, but then forced and legislated to subsidize the very communities that are denying them access to their own system. And so it has been through research and data.
To
Wrap
start
it
to
up.
wrap up. Yeah.
Sure. So much of it has been around research and data collection. It's been around our advocacy work by using that research and data. We've also used the creativity of our community through culture and art and music and media and spoken word to message differently when there's a media blackout. I'll drop a few links in the chat that demonstrates that the work that we've done here in Michigan, in Flint, and Detroit has actually changed federal policies over the last 10 years, even though we're still struggling to see those same policies codified in our community. And the last thing I'll say is that we are working currently on state policy to ensure water affordability and end water shutoffs. And so through the Well Coalition, we're very much on pace. We've actually introduced a package of bills, and on October the 15th, we'll host a press conference moving those initiatives forward. So thank you so much for my time.
Thank you so much, Monica. And thank you for building a model of organizing that works and that folks can learn from. And we have been able to document as part of the Utilities for All playbook that is now accessible. Thanks, Malia, for popping that up. Just really, really so inspiring to hear the work that you have been able to do with your team and community. And our last speaker, but certainly not least, is Katie Southall from Knoxville Water and Energy for All, KWEA. Katie, over to you.
Thank you. I will admit I'm very nervous, especially following after Miss Monica, who I could listen to all day, just the passion that she has for the work that she does and how eloquently she speaks on the issues and the work that she's doing. But I am a steering committee member with Knoxville Water and Energy for All. A little bit about us. We're a utility justice organization. We are focused on serving all utility burdened populations within KUB's service area, the Knoxville Utility Board here in Knoxville. We are advocating for racial justice and human dignity in our work to push KUB to make utility services affordable and accessible to all and end disconnections for customers facing unaffordable bills. And so the organization started back in 2020 in October. During the height of the pandemic, the intention behind the organization was to continue to hold KUB accountable post moratoriums being lifted, specifically through data sharing and leveraging that data on disconnections throughout the community. Some of the ways that was being done was through monthly utility burden Zoom calls that were put out to community. The intention behind that being by giving out that data, empowering community members to leverage that data at KUB board meetings and within advocacy spaces that we could kind of organize together to hopefully see more affordable utility bills moving forward. I did not come on to this organization until the end of 2022, I believe, through a steering committee initiative that the organization had taken on with the intention of having community members who had lived experiences with disconnections through KUB being a part of this work. So that's where I get really fired up about doing this type of work, is that lived experience, whether through childhood or my adult life being disconnected, that experience with what it is like to have to pay those disconnection fees, how it can feel very hopeless when you go into debt with utility companies, and just trying to get back to a sense of normalcy when something that is a necessity that you cannot live without, that you cannot live in a rental unit without, how it can be very hard to come back from that if you just have one bad month to where those late fees start accumulating. So it was the beginning of 2023 that we started doing some disconnection policy work, specifically around gathering community members together to talk about those lived experiences with disconnections, some of the unspoken policies of KUB, because a lot of those disconnection policies are very vague for the intention of them being able to operate without accountability. And so once we had those community members in a room and as steering committee members, we started sharing our experiences, similar to what the playbook talks about with shame, and how isolating being disconnected through utilities can be. We were able to come together as a community to where something that is very hard to talk about, the moment we were able to open up with our own stories, community members were able to step up and say, hey, me too. This is something that I've experienced. This is something that is ongoing, and this is something I would love to be a part of the solution for. And within some of those conversations was the need for a percentage of income payment plan. It's my understanding that the organization had been trying to push that forward for a period of time, and that it was falling on deaf ears with our utility company here in Knoxville. And so we had taken it upon ourselves as an organization to advocate for a PIP through our own pilot program that we were able to be funded through the University of Tennessee here for a research-based project, with which we took on, our goal was 10 households, but we ultimately ended up with 8, just so that we could have a very quality, we could give a very quality experience to those households we were working with on this PIP pilot, just to show the effectiveness both in the short term and long term of having a percentage of income payment plan operating within Knoxville and ultimately advocating for all of East Tennessee. This program went on for about 2 years. We worked with these 8 households. We were able to kind of come out of it with a different perspective than what we had gone in. We did do a community forum prior to starting the pilot program, where we really wanted to hear from community what barriers they thought we would encounter, what were very important for us to be intentional of in the program. But even within that, one of the main barriers that we faced was utility debt. We had community members that we were paying those payments for, but because they had anywhere between $700 to, for some households, $1,000 worth of utility debt going into this program, even the payments we were making were not enough to keep them out of final notice. And so it was later, it was maybe 2 months into the program, that we made an initiative and an effort as steering committee members, myself and our coordinator, who's actually on the call, Layla Malik, who helped our participants apply for LIHEAP to be able to zero out those balances, so that our community members were able to kind of have a fresh start. And from there was when we really saw them flourish. Towards the end of this year 2 part of the pilot program, we started doing video recordings of their testimonials and experiences. We were talking about things about how the PIP affected their quality of life, specifically what they were able to afford now that their utilities were within 10% of their income. And it was very humbling, and it was a really emotional process to hear from community members on exactly what they were using that additional funding for, to where it was anything as small as like being able to purchase like a toy at Five Below for the children in their home, or being able to not have to worry about food insecurity as much and be able to pick up food on the way home instead of just going hungry that evening. And so even with the limited funding that we had, we were able to pay, I believe, $29,000 towards utility bills. That was honestly exceeding the budget that we had anticipated going into the program. And we had just made it work for the sake of seeing it through all the way. We are now in the process of sharing out the data that we have collected and really getting community input on how to push disconnection policy forward, as well as advocate for a PIP in East Tennessee, specifically Knoxville right now, because that is what community members are really fired up on. Something that we heard from our recent policy share out was kind of community members advocating for us to be the people to run that PIP. We are a coalition of currently 4 people, and so it is obviously not feasible, but they were very transparent in sharing some of the barriers and risks of having our local utility company champion a PIP forward, or having a larger organization like CAC that we have operating here in Knoxville. And so we're really working with community right now in the next few community meetings and gatherings that we have to talk about what it looks like to have a accountable organization running a PIP, what it looks like to have an equitable program moving forward, so that no one is left behind and that there aren't any gaps within what we're advocating for that leaves behind our most vulnerable community members.
Thank you so much, Katie. Thanks for sharing your story. Thanks for all the work that you're doing with KWEA. And like Monica, I feel like you're really creating a model of organizing that is working and that folks on this call can learn from. So much gratitude to you. Thank you. All right, we're going to move into our moderated panel section of the call, and I'm going to pass the mic over to Erica to host this brief section.
Great. Yeah, thanks so much. I would love if folks in the call want to drop any questions that you have. We've got a few that we're going to ask, but then would love to get some from the crowd. So I want to start by asking our panelists as well to try to have a succinct answer as much as possible so that we can get some questions from the audience as well in our allotted time. So I want to start with, what does the phrase utilities for all mean to each of you? Anyone want to start?
This is Monica. I'll take a first stab at it. I would say utilities for all means that there is an equitable, accessible, safe, and affordable way to access the utilities that each individual person and family needs to use on a daily and an annual basis.
Yeah, love that. Any additions, Katie or Jessica, or different
Ye-
interpretation?
Yeah, I'll add very quickly that what that means is that nobody gets cut off, especially, when we're struggling to make ends meet, that these utilities are seen as a human right versus, a commodity that's to be privatized, sold, and not accessible to people who are most vulnerable. So I would add that.
Yeah, love that. Katie, anything you want to add?
I would just add that as we work towards utilities for all, something that we've talked about as kind of a step within that is to, here in Tennessee, unbundle those utilities. So here for KUB, your electricity, your gas, your water, and your wastewater are all bundled together. So if you are disconnected, those are disconnected together. By just separating those, that would be a huge step for families to where it is already hard to have to make the decision between whether or not you have all four of those utilities or food on your table. By being able to have a little more autonomy in those decisions to where I could maybe go without water for the next 24 hours for the sake of my kids having the lights on to be able to get ready for school the next day instead of having all four of those disconnected at once, is something that we're discussing advocating for as kind of a step within reaching those utilities for all.
Yeah. Yeah, that feels like there's all these important steps to take, right? To ultimately achieve our ultimate hope, right? To have utilities for everyone, regardless of your ability to pay. I wanted to kick a question over to Jessica specifically. When we were in kind of the early stages of talking about this project back in, early 2022, there was a pretty distinct choice to focus on water and energy utilities. And I'm wondering if you can just speak a little bit to some of the thinking behind that.
Yeah, so certainly I want to just name that this playbook specifically was inspired not only by the things that were happening in terms of, utility debt and the worsening of it during the shutdown, but also just to recognize that thank you so much. I just wanted to name that it was really important for us to continue like the original from the original playbook, and talking to the leaders in our nation that are doing this work around debt relief and interview them and distill like what's working, what we're still struggling with, and recognizing that this is like an effort like all across this country. And so, yeah, I think the reason why we included, we're the Energy Democracy Project and we work on electricity, but water is equally as important. And there is a direct relationship. There are some agencies, and especially here in California, that address both water and electricity at the same time. And I always like to name that those two are also dependent on each other and oftentimes used. Like electricity is used to move water, for example. And so I just wanted to share that. But just to name that it wasn't exclusive to electricity, and we wanted to be inclusive that it's the same issues that we see parallel with water, and those two things are very important. We also identified that broadband or access to the internet is also something that should be deemed a human right, and especially in the context of the shutdown, where that was a major source of our communications, be it for just connection to family, emergency services, but also to continue to be able to work, go to school, and that kind of thing. So there are so many other utilities that we could have included, but we stuck with electricity and water, and this work continues to address the others as well.
Yeah, thank you for that. And I want to name too, even that messaging, right? Like water is a human right, electricity is a human right, housing is a human right. That this is these things are all interconnected, and we talk about that in the playbook of how the messaging is also really important to tie these things together directly. I want to kick it over to Monica and ask you, specifically about the wins that you have had in Detroit. I know you talked a lot about the work that's going on, but what have some of those wins looked like?
Yes, we've had a couple of successes. I would say a big win for us was during the global pandemic when we were able to demonstrate that there was still a great need to not only stop shutting water off, but to restore water. We saw going into a global pandemic about 23,000 households had just been shut off going into January. And where things became really problematic is that the national demand was that people be able to wash their hands and properly sanitize to fend off this global pandemic. And so really grateful for Rashida Tlaib and Debbie Dingle using our research and data and the expertise that we had on our team as a grassroots organization, research we had already done prior to the pandemic to demonstrate that water was a critical part of what needed to be restored. And so there was a moratorium that happened in Michigan and in Detroit within about 48 hours after us spending years and years, really decades, fighting for water to be restored. We saw immediately the identification of resources, the ending of shutting off water, and also the forgiveness of debt. So we know that the processes we had been fighting for years are very much available to us. It's the matter of having the political will to do so. And so I think that work, and then I think the work that we were applying at the federal level, much as what was already talked about, there were groups coming together using our influence and power to actually let political actors know that we will not lend or back up anyone that does not see the prioritization of people having the access to water, housing, and food and energy that they need. And so I think that collective visioning, the willingness to put our power together and leverage that interest created some political shifts. And then it also meant that we also were able to be invited to the table where decisions were being made over, at least during the Biden administration, in a way that was creating some significant shifts in funding streams. So not that everything was perfect, but we were at least being invited to the conversation because we were seen as a political player at that point.
Yeah, no, I really appreciate you sharing those wins and also the power that can be built, right? To actually utilize that to get those wins. And I think celebrating wins is a really important part of our work, right? So thank you for sharing. Katie, I'm going to kick it over to you for a question and then take some from the audience here. But I'm curious, what recommendations do you have for any folks who are on this call who are, looking to work on canceling debt in their community and are, at that starting point?
Yeah, I think part of it is having access to that data to be able to identify and verbalize the problem. So that's kind of where the origins of KWA started, was with taking that data and putting it into a digestible one-page dashboard for community members, being intentional on sharing that out consistently month to month. It got to the point eventually to where we are now charged for asking for that data through our utility company. Because part of that I feel like is because they see the value and how that can be leveraged to really empower community to gather around the issue of unaffordable utilities in our area. We've seen very substantial increases in utility costs over the last year. That was demonstrated through the increase in utility bills data from our PIP participants, We were told it was going to be a slight increase through the Tennessee Valley Authority, anywhere between a 3 to 4% increase, and that is just not what was being reflected through those utility bills. Through our participants, we were seeing anywhere between a 30% to what I would say is a 50% increase. So just having access to those numbers so that when you are reaching out to these larger entities, these corporate organizations, you have language for the problem, you have numbers that back what you are saying. Because community members understand the issue, they're living it day to day. That's not the issue on getting them together. It's the issue of when you are in these rooms and are able to present the problem to these large entities that quite frankly don't care. At least having the numbers to back up what you're saying will kind of, it's harder to ignore what's going on that way, I would say.
Yeah, that makes sense. I want to, pull from the audience here this question surrounding, the use of or the continued spread of these data centers. I know that these are like a really heavy use of water, right, and electricity, that they require so much. And additionally, thinking about the increase in climate disasters that we're seeing throughout the country, I want to ask maybe if a panelist or two could respond to, how are we preparing for increased shutoffs, for increased disasters, and what are we doing to address the data centers?
I think briefly, from our perspective, we had to do a number of things to help ourselves. We call it a SOF, saving ourselves. And so part of that was we first had to make a shift in making sure that we could deliver water to our neighbors that were shut in or didn't have transportation. But we found that water is very difficult to move, especially in volume, because we were moving whole semi trucks of water, about 200 tons of water just by hand. And what we found is that it was better for us to do a snowflake effect where we would recruit different collaborative partners like food banks, making sure that we were being sensitive to language diversity. Detroit is one of the most ethnically diverse cities in America. We also had to make sure that we were putting in place ways where people could be on the bus routes to pick up their water. And so I think the intention that we gave to make sure that we were partnering in a way that made it easier for people to access their water. What we saw in Flint is that when people would go to retrieve water from the grocery store, they were being targeted by ICE. So we made sure that it was a food bank in their neighborhood where they didn't have to venture as far. We also began to think when we got asked for relief from Jackson, Mississippi, or Benton Harbor, or even to provide relief just recently in California, we were able to give them our playbook around the way to set up a water distribution process, the way to buy in bulk, what that needs to look like, what you need to have in place in terms of human, woman and manpower, and what you need, and possibly having an equipment. People don't think about those things when they're in a crisis or an emergency. I think the last thing I'll say that we really learned to do really well is to collaborate with our young people, because they had systems and processes of being able to move people quickly. People loved the pop-ups when we would pop up and distribute water or pop up and deliver water. We were thinking more systematically and more organized. They were thinking, ways can we make the movement fun? And it did. They'd have a dance party in the middle of a distribution cycle. But those are things that brought some levity to a very difficult and complicated process. And then they would film it and turn it into a short film or a video and put some music over top of it and release it within 24 hours. So that too helped with the messaging and the narrative, to where the media wouldn't cover us. They started covering us because they didn't want them to get ahead of them. So it was those kinds of tactics, really grassroots at every level.
Yeah, I really appreciate that, Monica. I'm hearing a lot of like taking care of material needs, right? That's going to go a really long way. And I think to Kyle, to your question as well, of like, how can we, compensate community members? I think, feeding people, giving people water, giving people access to these things is a really important way to do that. I want to pivot towards one more question before we wrap up the call, which is this question about coalition work and working together. I know we mentioned, Monica, you just mentioned, the ICE attacks that are happening on our communities. And I'm really curious to ask, panelists, how do you work in coalition with other groups, and how do you, find ways to come together on these issues that are all intersectional and really connected?
This is Monica again. If no one's going to jump in, I would say you have to really operate from a set of values. Because if we have shared values, we don't have to have the same tactic to get the process done, but we at least need to agree that we share the values of why we do the work. Because what we have found is that there are groups that we worked with initially for about a decade, different in terms of tactics and approaches, and some people decided that was a deal breaker. My position is I can stay in the room with anybody other than the devil himself to get the work done that we need to get done. But that's not everybody's outlook. I'm more dedicated to the outcome than I am to the process. Some people are more committed to the process. I think it's important, though, that there is a set format in terms of ethics and values set on the front end and revisiting those often. And then should always be looking for ways for others to on-ramp into the work and to off-ramp. Some people are not going to stay as dedicated to some of this work that some of us have. I'm fine with a 20 or lifetime commitment to this work. Others may get in and then decide they have to jump out. But we've got to be okay with that, because at the end of the day, it's about building the power that's going to create the systemic shift that we need. Not so much who goes on the journey with us, but that we get to the destination.
Yeah, I really appreciate that, Monica. Thank you. Being direct about those values, being direct about how we're working together and what we are actually trying to achieve are things that many of our interviewees also, echoed. So really appreciate that. And I want to give a really big shout out again to Katie, Jessica, and Monica for joining us for this discussion and for all of your insights. And I'm going to pass it over to Selena to wrap us out. I want to say thank you again to everyone for all of your support of this project.
Agreed. Echoing those thanks. So much appreciation and gratitude for all the wisdom that you shared, for your time and energy here on this call, and for the years of work that you have been leading and paving the path for Debt Jubilee. So again, feel free to download the playbook. If you have any troubles at all downloading, I'm going to drop my email in the chat. We've been having some tech troubles. And again, my name is Selena. I'm the director of the Energy Democracy Project, and we're gearing up for some exciting programming for the rest of the year and in 2026. So make sure to follow us along, stay on the newsletter, and we'll be sending out the recording after this, as well as some additional information answering some of the unanswered questions from the chat today. Thank you for coming, and hope to see you all very soon. Bye, everybody. Have a great rest of your day.